This is Granular, the new granular machine for Tonverk. You are now listening to
Granular.
Tonverk's new granular machine.
Granular cuts a sample into tiny pieces called grains, which can be rearranged and played back in different ways. The machine is 8-voice polyphonic, and each voice can play up to 8 grains at once. Granular also comes with a unique filter page featuring an EQ and a variety of filter types, giving us more tools to shape our sounds. To load the Granular machine, select a track, hold Function and press Source, and select Granular. The sample slot comes empty, so turn knob D on the source page to select a sample from your project. Now, before we dive in, it's important to know there are 3 play modes in Granular: Random, Sync, and Oscillator, selectable on the second source page. Each mode defines how grains are triggered. In random mode, grains are triggered at random. This mode is useful for creating organic, unpredictable motion. In sync mode, grains are tempo synced. This mode is useful for creating rhythmic variations. In oscillator mode, grains are triggered in repetition to create a continuous sound. This mode is great for generating sustained tones as well as glitchy textures. We will explore each play mode in detail through examples, but first, let's go over the parameters of Granular. I'll switch to this track where I have my vocal sample in Granular. Let's start with grain size. This controls the length of each grain. Smaller sizes will sound choppy and tight, while larger sizes will reveal more of the sample in each grain. Density controls how often grains are triggered and how closely they are spaced. The behavior of density changes depending on which play mode we are using. In random mode, higher density will trigger more grains. Since grains are triggered at random, density sets the likelihood of grains being triggered. In sync mode, density sets the tempo division since the grains are tempo synced. Hold Function while turning the knob for density and size to jump between different divisions and find the combination for the rhythm you like. In oscillator mode, grains are played continuously, and density adjusts how closely they are spaced, as well as how much overlap happens. Lower density causes more overlap, while higher density spaces out the grains. We will come back to how different values of density can be applied musically later in this video. Now, moving on, grain amount on the second page sets how many grains play simultaneously, with up to 8 grains per voice. Granular is 8-voice polyphonic, so with a high grain amount, we can create thick, layered sounds. Grains start from the point set by position. And by increasing spread, we can randomize the position for each grain. Notice the grains spread around the playhead, and eventually they start randomly throughout the sample when spread is set to max. When spread is set to 0, grains will always start from the position value. Now, scan allows us to morph through the sample. At 0, there is no motion. As I increase it to a positive value, it will push the playhead forward
to Granular.
and also faster towards the max value, which is 2.
To Granular. Tonverk's new granular machine.
Negative values move the playhead backwards, even though each grain is still playing forward, and again faster towards -2. If you wanted to change the direction of each grain, you can do so on the second page with direction right here. We can morph between forward and reverse, affecting some of the grains to play forward and the other reversed, depending on what percentage this is set to. Then we have fade and shape that together define the window which acts as an envelope per grain. Fade controls how much envelope is applied to each grain, while shape adjusts the attack and release phase. Depending on these parameters, we can make grains more percussive or smooth. Lastly, we have tune and pan. The sample can be transposed up or down by 2 octaves without affecting the playback speed. And pan spreads grains across the stereo field for a wider sound. And that's it for the grain parameters. Let's also look at the filter page, as it is a unique feature of Granular. At the bottom, we have a multi-mode filter with a spread control. There are many filter types available: low pass 4, low pass 2, band pass 2, high pass 2, low pass notch, notch 1, notch 2, and it can be turned off as well. The cutoff frequency for the filter also sets the center frequency for the EQ above, which features low and high shelf gain. To use the EQ, set the shelving frequencies using knob B and C, and use knob A and D to adjust the gain to either boost or reduce the frequencies below and above the set points. Since Granular can easily access a wide range of tones, the EQ and the filter become useful tools for shaping the final sound. All right, now that we've covered what each parameter does, let's look at how they are used in musical context. In the next section, I'll walk you through a series of examples in each play mode to share practical tips and also touch on modulation and filter ideas. Let's start with random mode. Since grains are triggered at random, this mode is great for creating organic, irregular movements. Here is the original sample for the first example. And here is the result. A drifting pad. Let's rebuild this pad together. Here's the starting point. First, I'll start with a fairly large grain size because I want a continuous sound. And since grain size is large, I will lower density so to prevent things from getting too chaotic. Especially because I'm going to increase grain amount as well to layer the grains and also fill in the gaps. Let's also adjust fade and shape to soften the edges of the grains. And I'll switch the direction to reverse just to enhance the atmospheric texture. Now, as you can see on the screen, the grains are only playing from this limited portion of the sample right now. So to create a wider movement, I will raise spread to around halfway. Then to add to this, I have set up modulation for scan with a slow triangle wave. So this will move the playhead slowly forward and backwards, and spread is also helping scatter the grains. Scan and spread together will create a continuous motion without repeating the same pattern. Now it's sounding a little harsh right now, so let's come to the filter page and put a bandpass filter. Then modulate the cutoff frequency with an LFO very slowly to create this subtle swelling or breathing feel. And finally, I'll send this track to delay and reverb. I'm using rumskel reverb as a send with a huge size, which works great for creating this kind of big, washy ambience. And that's it. We have rebuilt the pad. Now, here's a quick variation using the same sample. As you can hear, this one is less continuous and has irregular, fluctuating motion. The core movement of this patch comes from size and density modulation. So I'm slowly modulating density with a sine wave, so the number of grains rises and falls. Then I'm modulating grain size with a random waveform, which shifts the grains between smooth and choppy. Together, these modulations create unpredictable bursts and fluctuations of grains. Now, on top of that, both scan and spread are set low, so the grains are moving in one direction with just a little bit of scatter. Now, just to quickly show you, here is a pattern full of Granular tracks in random mode. All of these tracks are in random mode, and I used a similar set of parameters to combine different types of textures, drifting in and out. So this is an example of more developed pattern using random mode. Now let's move on to sync mode. In sync mode, grains are tempo synced to the project tempo. So it's great for rhythmic repeats, stutters, and anything that you want to lock to the beat. Here's a one-shot chord sample, which I have turned into this. Let's rebuild this one from scratch. Here's the starting point in Granular. Now in sync mode, density and size work together to set the tempo division. To quickly align the grains to the project tempo, hold function and turn both density and size to jump around different divisions. Raising density will lead to smaller tempo divisions, grains playing faster, and so will reducing size. Density and size will interact with each other, so try different combinations and find the rhythm that works for you. When you are setting the rhythm, make sure the grain amount on the second page is set to 1. Because once grain amount is increased, it will start layering the grains and that can obscure the rhythm. So start with amount 1 and increase it later. Next, let's shape the grains. Fade is already set to max, and by adjusting shape, I can make this more percussive and plucky, or soft, or reversed like. Let's stay around the middle. In addition, I'll increase spread halfway and move around position to find a point I like. Even though this sample is short, it offers variation in tone, pitch, volume, and texture, so by playing different parts of the sample, I can easily generate interesting motion. So that's it for this chord, and hopefully this showed you the basics of sync mode. Now let's take a look at a slightly more advanced application. Here's a pattern I made using the same chord sample repeating in sync mode. In this pattern, I am modulating grain size, which disrupts the fixed rhythm and make it more evolving. On top of that, I've parameter locked different LFO shapes and speeds per step, as you can see. So there's a rhythm variation every step. The LFO is in trig mode, so the modulation resets every step, and this helps keep the overall feel stay aligned to the project tempo. Grain amount for this track is set to 1 because I want to hear the rhythmic definition, but on this trig, I parameter locked a higher grain amount to use it as an accent. scan and spread are set to 0, but I'm modulating position with a random waveform. And in this way, the playback position changes irregularly, adding to the stuttery feel. Let's also take a look at how the filter and EQ come into play. I have a high-pass filter, and I'm modulating the cutoff frequency with the envelope with a slow attack. And to enhance this movement, I added a tiny boost on the low end, so when the filter cutoff dips, there's more body to the chords, and also a little bit of boost on the high end for the extra shine. Let's look at one more sync mode example, this time using drums. In this pattern on track 1, I have a simple kick and snare going on. I resampled it using Recorder and loaded into Granular on track 2. And here I used sync mode to create rhythmic fills and layers. Let's listen to track 1 and 2 together. So this works a bit like retrig, since the grains can repeat at a specific tempo division, but with a lot more creative freedom. On these steps, I have parameter locked a variety of grain settings. For example, some steps have a high grain amount to work as a layer and make the drum sound heavier, like this one layering the first kick. Other steps have specific modulation settings, such as this one with grain size modulation, so the rhythm will kind of fall apart, and this one with an envelope modulation on tune for a pitched rolling effect. So this is just another idea how sync mode can be used. Lastly, let's look at oscillator mode. In oscillator mode, grains are triggered in steady repetition, and depending on the parameters, it can produce a wide range of tones and textures. For the first example, I'm going to turn my voice saying into this synth. Let's rebuild this patch together on track 3. First, I will find a good position where the pitch is stable. Next, I'm going to set a medium to large grain size. If size is set too low, like right now, it's going to sound gritty and buzzy, which might be cool for other types of sound like bass. But for this sample, I want to preserve the original vocals tone, so let's make it large. Next, I'll raise grain amount. This will launch more grains at once per trigger, making the sound thicker and more continuous. Density plays an important role in how continuous grains sound. When density is set to max, grains are spaced out and there's a rhythmic definition because a new grain will trigger after the previous grain has played all the way till its end. So there's no overlap of the grains. As density goes down, grains will be more tightly spaced and will start to overlap. At 0, all grains overlap. So to create a stable tone, I will aim for somewhere in the middle. Fade and shape are okay here, and on the amp page, let's lower the attack. I'll also increase pan for the grains to create subtle motion across the stereo field. I'll leave scan and spread at 0 because this sample goes down in pitch and I want to maintain a steady pitch. So basically, I only want to use a small portion of this sample at the top, and Granular allows me to do that. Now on the filter page, let's add a notch filter. On the original patch, I spent some time setting the cutoff frequency around the formant peaky area and set up this modulation on the cutoff frequency to sweep the notch slowly, which will create this wah effect. I'm also going to add a little bit of pitch modulation to add vibrato. Let's not forget to add reverb And that's it for this singing synth. So this was an example of using oscillator mode to create a continuous tone, but let's also look at its use for creating glitchy, time-stretched textures. As an example, I'll turn my narration voice,
You are now listening to Granular.
into this.
You are now listening to Granular.
Let's do this together. So I'll start by setting a medium grain size, long enough to keep some of the tone from the original voice, but still short enough to break this sentence into fragments. Next, I'll raise grain amount to add thickness and some tonal character. Then I'll lower density so the grains overlap pretty heavily to create a continuous, smeared sound instead of rhythmic pulses. From here, I add a slow scan movement so the playhead moves through the sample. Scan is the key parameter of this effect. The slower the speed, the more stretched and glitchy the result becomes. If I want to make the sound a bit messier, I can introduce some spread to add a little bit of motion around the playhead, or mix a small amount of reversed grains by setting the direction percentage to around 80 or 90. And of course, we can play around with other parameters like tune and pan. So for this kind of time-stretched effect, the key parameter is scan. And besides that, you can produce a wide range of tone and texture by experimenting with different combinations of density, size, and amount. Here's a quick demo.
You are now listening to Granular. You are now listening to Granular. You are now listening to. You are now listening to Granular. You are now listening to Granular. You are now listening to Granular.
And depending on the source material, results can be very different. Here's a pattern where I resampled this drum break and created glitchy fills and layers in oscillator mode. Alright, so that was a lot to go through. That is all for the examples. Each play mode has its own strengths, but there's plenty of room to experiment, and you can transform any sample in countless ways. Thanks for watching and have fun exploring Granular.